All right, we are back into the car now. And what we have to do is take out the clutch flywheel. You have to be able to rotate the flywheel around. You can use a screwdriver. I've got 3 teeth off an old ring gear on a piece of rod. Fits on that bolt. That lets you work it around a little easier. But we're going to pop all the bolts out of the pressure plate and drop it down out of the housing. We don't have to take this housing off because we can get to everything we need to. If you are reusing the pressure plate, you'll need to rotate it around and loosen each bolt a little bit at a time. But since I'm not reusing it, I'm just buzzing them out. It'll probably end up bending the one tab, but that's okay because it's all getting recycled. Okay, get the 6 pressure plate bolts out. Be able to work that back off of the pins. And it will drop down out of there. Next, we got to reach up inside and take out the 6 flywheel bolts. Okay, flywheel's out. Now we need to reach up in there and pull out that pilot bearing. I've got a puller for that. Hopefully it'll take it out. Okay, this is the proper tool for pulling out a pilot bearing. I don't think I've ever got a pilot bearing to come out with one of them, especially not on these. Here is the new bearing. It has a roller bearing inside this housing. You drive it in this way to where this will be facing out of the crank when you're done because there's a little seal in there. The way I usually get these out is I take a carbide burr on a grinder and go up through the center and grind the side of it out. Be careful not to get into your crank, but you can, this outer material is aluminum. So once you get through the bearing, it grinds pretty fast. Once you cut one of the sides out, then it will pop out with your puller, no problem. But you can try just the puller to start with. If that don't work, you're going to have to get inventive. But the die grinder bit has always worked for me. So now we'll take this and drive this back in the hole with a piece of flat bar stock. Drive it in till it's flush. Okay, if you were looking underneath there, you saw that we need a new rear main seal. And I forgot to pick one up, and this is Thanksgiving, so we're going to have to wait till tomorrow to grab one of them. So right now I was getting a few other things done. I have never had to take a master cylinder out of one of these before, and that was pretty slick. Under the dash, you just have a spring clip, pops that arm off, and this fits down in a hole underneath your brake reservoir. All you needed to do was 2 bolts, get your washer tank out of the way, and then this just latches into the firewall. You grab on, turn it counterclockwise, and pull it out. I like it. So now we're going to stick a new one in there. This was the problem with it. That little ring that you're supposed to be able to push down to disconnect it was so deteriorated it just crumbled. So I ended up cutting the line off since we were putting a new slave on there anyway. But while we're here, we're putting this on too. Picked up a new genuine GM master cylinder because it comes with everything. All the aftermarket ones just come with this, and you have to reuse your line and reservoir. And like I said, part of the problem with the old one was this. Here's what that looks like underneath. Just a little plastic sleeve that when you disconnect it, had to push that down and free the arms. And I didn't want to reuse that if I could keep from it. And probably better having genuine GM. So we'll slip this back down there and twist it into the firewall. First order of business today was taking out the old rear main seal, and like everything else on this car, it wasn't going to cooperate. There's little tabs in this cover. You're supposed to be able to pry in and pop that seal out. That wasn't cutting it. What I ended up doing was putting a small self-tapping screw through the edge of the seal. As long as you stay out away from the lip of the crank, you're not going to hurt anything. And that gave me something to pry on with a crowbar. And that still wasn't working, because you can see this one here is broke off. So then, as I'm prying, I had to work around the seal with a propane torch to get it to finally pull out. But now it's ready to come out, so we can continue on. Okay, these new seals have a white insert, and that keeps the seal flat back so you can get it pushed up on there. So leave the insert on till you've got it pushed up over the edge of the crank. Now we can drive it on in and seat the seal. Well, that new seal went in nicely. I've got a alignment tool that I use to push it in from Sunset Corvette, but it actually went in by hand. It's got steps around the outside edge, so I just was pushing it by hand and it just bottomed right out. So no need to beat on this particular seal. And this was a Felpro seal. So hopefully you have the same results. Made it nice and easy to put in. Just make sure it's bottomed out and even all the way around. Now I'm going to do just a little bit of scraping. Clean out the inside of the bell housing, and then we can get on with putting the clutch in. It actually cleaned up pretty good. Used an old Bondo scraper to knock the big chunks off, then a little diesel fuel and a rag wiped right up. Not perfect, that doesn't need to be. On this car, I'm going to do just like I did on mine and use the LS7 clutch pressure plate and flywheel. I like them. They have a good feel. They hold good. I mean, mine's just the standard cam exhaust car, so I don't know how much horsepower it's making, but these hold fine. The only problem is this step lift, instead of having a flat flywheel, you have a little trouble getting the pressure plate up inside that bell housing. So what I do is cut off about it's the pins that cause you the trouble. So I cut the pin down about 1/3. I'll cut 2 of the pins down, then go ahead and bevel the top again so they'll slide down in there. They'll still work just fine as far as aligning the pressure plate, but it gives you just enough room to slide it all up in there and not have any trouble. And there's your 2 cut off pins and your 1 long one. So when you go to install the pressure plate, you'll rotate this to where the cut off ones are toward the bottom, and you can hang once you get the pressure plate up there, you can hang it on that top pin and then start getting your bolts on. So let's go bolt this onto the crank. Okay, flywheel's up in there. Make sure you put that empty hole in the spot on the crank that's empty, so it keeps everything lined up. Got my crank holder there. Now we need to torque them down, crisscross pattern. 3 steps, 15, 37, and 74 foot-pounds. I buzzed them down with my little electric impact, so I'd say 15's already done. So we'll go 37 and 74. Okay, everything is torqued. Got my 2 short pins down here at the bottom, so we'll clean this flywheel surface off really good with solvent, and then we'll bring out the pressure plate and the disc. Okay, I wiped down everything. I've got the pressure plate not the pressure plate, the clutch disc just setting up in there. The part that sticks out from the disc, the other side's fairly flat. This side faces your pressure plate. If you try to stick it the other way, it's not going to seat down on there. So now I'm going to try to slide the pressure plate up in place. Woo. It was a tight fit, but it went. That was definitely a tight fit, but it did slip up in there. Had to rotate the flywheel around a little bit till I found the sweet spot for it to drop in. Once you've got it on there, start putting some bolts in loosely and rotate it around, get all 6 bolts in. Then we will put the alignment tool in the center to center up the disc and start tightening everything down. Okay, got all 6 bolts in. The kit came with new pressure plate bolts, so use those if your kit came with them. Next, The alignment tool slides into the disc, and then you have to slide it on into the pilot bearing. Feel it snap in there. So now we can start rotating it around, snugging all the bolts down until they bottom out. Then once they're all bottomed out, torque them to 47 foot-pounds. As you're working it around, make sure nothing's getting in a bind and you can still move this tool freely. Because you want it to be right on the money or you'll have trouble stabbing the torque tube back into it. Okay, they're all in there, torqued down. As you're working it around, slowly tightening the bolts up, make sure those pins go through the holes. If they're not lining up, loosen it back up, wiggle it a little bit, but mine went right through. Now we'll pull out the clutch. Look at that. Nice and smooth. That should stab real easy later. Okay, what now? I can go ahead and hook up bring the torque tube assembly out, the whole back end, get it bolted up to this bell housing. And then we'll bleed the clutch and start putting the rest of the stuff back together.